Good evening. Thanks for joining us. We're very happy to have you here today with us. This is a very special event to have Barbara Kahn and Robert Gonzalez with us for Barbara Kahn and Friends. My name is Leanne Bowley. I'm the Director of Programming at Village Preservation, and we're so glad you're joining us. So here at Village Preservation, we have been documenting, celebrating, and fighting for the preservation of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo since 1980. We work to expand and extend landmark and zoning protections and stop inappropriate development, also encouraging appropriate development in our neighborhoods. We host roughly 75 programs. I'm hoping to get it higher this year, and many of them are free, like tonight's event. So that's why we have up on the screen a QR code if you want to scan that, if you have a mobile device handy, or you can just go to our website and learn how you can make a donation or become a member if you like these types of programs and want to support us. Our events are meant to illuminate the cultural and architectural history, heritage, and depth and value of preservation in our communities. We're a nonprofit membership organization, and that's why we're asking you to check out our website and consider donating tonight or in the future. A little bit of Zoom protocol. Everyone's muted except for our lovely presenters this evening and myself. So if you have questions, it's still interactive. You can still put in questions anytime in the chat or the Q&A button. We'll do questions at the end, but feel free to populate as they go, and I'll make sure to pick those up at the Q&A time. And if you have any questions about anything, just put those in the chat. So without further ado, I will introduce our speaker tonight, Barbara Kahn, who you will see, she has done an oral history with us. So we're very happy to have you check that out as well as this evening's event. Barbara is an East Village playwright who has produced dozens of works rooted in history, especially the history of New York and marginalized or oppressed people, with a frequent focus on the experience of women, LGBTQ+ people, and personal trauma. Her award-winning plays have been produced at the Theater for the New City since 1994, though she has produced plays throughout New York, Paris, and London, and her career as a playwright stretches back decades. And interesting to note, Theater for the New City is a Village Preservation Award so that's something to note and is of great pride for us and hopefully them. Barbara grew up in Southern New Jersey and from a young age pursued becoming an actor and playwright. As soon as she could, she moved to New York City and started working Off Off Broadway, building her resume as both an actor and playwright. In 1990, she co-founded Sisters on Stage, a lesbian theater collective to provide a platform for lesbian playwrights and plays. She is a recipient of multiple awards, including the James R. Quirk Award for Performing Arts, the Acker Award, the Doric Independent Playwright Award, and the Torch of Hope Award, honoring a lifetime of achievement in nonprofit theater. And it's so good. Hopefully we can honor you this evening, Barbara, by having you with us today. So take it away.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I want to welcome everybody who's joining us tonight. Thank you very, very much. And, you know, this event is for you. And I want to thank Village Preservation for inviting me to do this, after inviting me to do a lengthy oral history. I want to introduce Robert Gonzalez, who is, I call him my theater partner, part of my theater family. And Robert and I have been working together for more than a decade. Robert is a true Renaissance man of the theater. A native Texan, he is a singer, trained in musical theater, legit, and opera, an actor, dancer, director, choreographer, and musical director. He's performed off-Broadway in Fools in Love, Tempest-Tossed Fools, Kennedy's Children, I Hope They Sell Beer on Broadway by Tucker Max, and KNB the Musical. Robert has also originated roles in 10 productions written by me that were performed at Theater for the New City, many of which he has worked with me as choreographer, music director, and co-director. Robert has also appeared in numerous off Broadway workshops, stage readings, and regional productions. And I am absolutely delighted to share tonight's event with him. I'd like to mention a few things about Theater for the New City for those of you who are either out of town or not familiar with the legendary theater that has been the home to my play since 1994. Theater for the New City was founded in 1970 by Crystal Field, who is still the executive artistic director. The many awards it has received include a Pulitzer Prize, numerous Obie Awards, a Kennedy Center Award, an Acker Award, Odelko Awards, and as was previously mentioned, a Village Preservation Award, and that's just some of them. TNC is a community-based theater in New York City that nurtures new and experienced artists. In its 4-theater complex, it produces approximately 30 new American plays every year. The annual Lower East Side Festival of the Arts and the annual Summer Street Theater are offered free to the community, a gift from Theater for the New City. The lobby also serves as a curated art gallery that supports local visual artists. So you can check out their website to see more about their illustrious past, their present, and what's coming up in the future. They are at theaterforthenewcity.net. So to begin the presentation tonight, I'm going to do a monologue from my one-woman play called Seema Story. In this excerpt, Seema, an immigrant, relates meeting her longtime companion in 1922. Rachel is my companion. She has such love of life. What she went through, and still to be able to see so much joy in the world. She was an orphan since very young. Her parents left her money for a dowry, but she used the money instead to buy a false name, a sponsor to come to America. For people who are alone and desperate, there's always someone offering a better life, but if you have the right price. Rachel rescued me from loneliness. I saved her from the runners. I was already in America. I lived in New York, and I worked for a photographer. I volunteered part-time at the Home for Immigrant Girls that was on 17th Street. Now, we would go to Ellis Island to rescue the girls. The runners worked with the factory owners and sometimes with the agents in Europe who sold those false names to people who had no relatives here. And then they would go to Ellis Island to look for women, young women who arrived with no one to meet them. And they would pretend to be the uncle or the cousin. So immigration would release the girls and they would end up in the sweatshops working like slaves, or worse even. So we would go to Ellis Island to rescue them. So one day, when it was my turn to go, there was Rachel, all alone, standing at the gate, her papers clutched in one hand, the cloth bag in the other. She was a real greener. Just then I spotted the runner. I knew him from other times. We called him Valentino because he was handsome like an actor. He turned to Rachel. He removed his hat and bowed. And she gave him the most radiant smile I have ever seen. Well, and then I started screaming in English and Yiddish and Russian, "You leave my cousin alone, lost my Schwester consider, stuffed of Pekoya." He ran away. And there was Rachel looking at me like I was a mad woman. And that's the way that we met. Every week, I write to my cousin Malka every Monday. And when I write to her in Sjöstagrad, I write about Rachel, but never yet an answer. There's been a war, a revolution, a civil war. I don't know if I still have a family. That's the pain that stays with you always. The other pain I'll get over. I'll make myself forget the other pain. All these years in America, Wyoming with Rachel, At night, when the memories come to me, she comforts me, but she never asks why I cry, and I never speak of it. I've been afraid the ghosts of Europe would haunt my new life with her. But every week I write about her to cousin Malka, and every Monday at dinner, Rachel asks, "Did you remember to write your letter today?" And I reply, "Of course." And then she says, "This time you'll get an answer. You wait and see. And if not this time, next time. I'm certain of it." She says it with so much confidence and love that sometimes I believe her. Thank you. So, coming up next is a presentation by Robert, and it's from Birds on Fire, which is a musical drama about the Triangle Factory fire, which was in March 1911. And I wrote the book and lyrics with music by the wonderful Alison Tartaglia. This monologue is performed by the character who's the guide, who also he shifts into various roles throughout the play. So this is a compilation of his talk to the audience. You're on, Robert.
Great. Well, thank you, Barbara, very, very much. And before I begin, I just want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. And Barbara, it's an honor to be here with you today and to participate in this. And I thank you very much for allowing me to do so and joining you with this too. And like Barbara said earlier, for everyone to know, Barbara said her and I have been working together for over a decade. Actually, as of this year, it is now 15 years. So
Wow.
yes, I know, 15 years. The first show I ever did with Barbara was 1918, A House Divided, which you'll hear a song from later. And that was actually in April of 2007. So it is 15 years too. We started rehearsals right around now. Anyway, so it's right around this time anyway.
I haven't written the next play that's scheduled for next February, so now I know I have to write a part for you.
That's right. And so to give a little bit further explanation about this, and this is what Barbara said, this is from Birds on Fire. This is from the fourth show that I actually worked with Barbara on. And so, like I said, the picture that was shown earlier was actually me at the beginning of this, looking at the newspapers. That's how this whole thing starts. So here we go. Vincenza, Ida, Jenny, Josephina, Tilly, Max, Anna, Tina, Casey, Weintraub, Steiglitz, Sorkin, Maltese, unknown female. Unknown female, and another unknown female, and another unknown male. Perhaps we'll even name them. Well, the Ash Building, Green Street and Washington Place, Greenwich Village, New York City, USA. It was 135 feet high, so its wooden trim, wooden window frames, and wood floors were all legal. Well, the building, it's still there. The shell of the building was fireproof, but not what it was inside. Well, that includes the people, of course. 146 in all. So, fate will have her way. The factory where the unions tried to organize and failed, well, that happened in 1909. So what's next? Well, a little happiness for our characters before the tragedy. Every day, they worked hard in the overcrowded, dangerous Triangle Factory where the door opened in, not out. The fire escape, well, it led to the courtyard, not to the street, and they counted the elevator as a fire escape in order to satisfy the regulations. Well, the regulations they couldn't or wouldn't satisfy, they ignored. Well, For example, the Commission on the Congestion of Populations recommended at least 500 cubic feet of airspace for every employee. The Triangle provided only 125 feet. Well, what's been going on in the factory in the spring of 1911? Well, the owners added yet more sewing machines. Where do they find the room to do this? Well, the 9th floor was already overcrowded to near capacity. Well, if they moved the machines closer together and left less room in the aisles between the rows, they could squeeze in a few more machines. And they moved the fastest producing workers from payment by the piece to a flat salary. And yeah, you guessed it, less than they could ever earn with piecework. But still, the workers kept silent. Well, there's Tweedledee and Tweedledum and Tweedledummer, better known as the factory owner and the alderman and the New York City superintendents. First letter. To the owners, Triangle Factory. I have immediate concern with the crowding of so many people on the top 3 floors. It has been brought to my attention that your firm has never held a fire drill. Well, without previous instruction on how to handle themselves in such an emergency, a fire would panic the girls. I recommend Mr. H.F.J. Porter, one of the best fire prevention experts in the city, be called to set up the drills. Signed, P.J. McCown, expert on fire prevention, Columbia University. The next letter. To the Superintendent of Buildings. There have been much concern that a fire, not unlike the recent fire in Newark, New Jersey, that cost the lives of 25 factory workers, could occur right here in New York City. Well, from the windows of my classroom, I can see the crowded and dangerous conditions in the Ash Building across the yard. Signed, Professor Francis W. Anar, New York University School of Law. Well, that's the way that it was. Letters and promises, more letters and promises broken. And nothing changed. It's impossible for people without a heart to have a change of heart. And doing nothing can be a very dangerous thing, a very dangerous thing. Doing nothing has its consequences. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. That play we wrote and produced for the centennial of the fire. And I don't write documentaries, I write plays, but I do a lot of research so that to keep whatever needs to be accurate. And that was the way that we handled it. We actually had life-size puppets representing Tweedledum and Tweedledee, you know, the politicians and the factory owners. And just so, for those of you who don't know much more about the factory fire, the owners had insurance on all of their employees, and for every dead employee they made $75, which in 1911 was a lot of money. The surviving family members got nothing. And I think it was either 3 or 5 days after the fire, they reopened at a different location with a big ad in the local newspaper that the Triangle Factory is open for business. So it was just horrifying. And another thing is that there were so many witnesses on the ground watching this fire that could not be fought because none of the equipment could reach to the 9th floor, and the women who didn't want to burn in the flames jumped from the windows and people watched them. And that's where the name Birds on Fire comes from, because the reporter said they looked like birds on fire with their long skirts flapping. And one of the people who saw this was a woman named Frances Perkins, and it horrified her so much that she ended up actually working in the labor movement and was Franklin Roosevelt's cabinet member in charge of labor, and she was responsible for many of the regulations and laws that we have protecting workers today, and that all came out of the fire. So I just wanted to share some of that information with you. Yes, thank you, Janice. My friend Janice just wrote, yes, Frances Perkins was the first woman Secretary of Labor. So I'm going to move ahead to the present in New York City of and what's happening, and it's still happening, and it's been happening throughout all of New York City's history, but now we have a name for it, and we call it gentrification. And before writing the play, I walked around the Lower East Side looking at the homeless people because I wanted to acknowledge what was going on. And what shocked me was how many older women I found on the sidewalks, homeless, selling their belongings. And that became my play called Co-Op, and I'm going to do an excerpt from that for you. And this is Martha telling her story. I used to live in that building. I lived in apartment 3R, that's third floor rear. That's how they numbered the apartments then. And there were 2 apartments on each floor. And now they got 6. And each one costs more than what my mother and I used to pay. Yeah, I lived in that apartment with my mother until she died, and then for 12 years after that until I got evicted. See, this rich man came into the neighborhood and he bought up all the buildings where the poor people live, and then he offered us money to move out, but it was never enough money for me to move somewhere else. And then he stopped fixing things. He said it's because poor people keep breaking them. Like that makes sense to anybody who's got all their marbles. Then in the middle of winter, he shut off the boiler. So we didn't have any heat or hot water. And so some of the people moved out. And then he let these real bad characters move into the empty apartments. And I got beat up real bad, like outside in the hallway outside my apartment. So I missed so many days' work at the restaurant that let me go after 9 years. So I was late with the rent. It was for the first time ever. That was enough for them to get their fancy lawyer to get me evicted. Now I come here every day. That was my home for 28 years, and I sell a few things. And then the neighbors all complain about me to the police. No, it's not the neighbors, it's the owners. That's what I'm talking about. All the people that bought my apartment. They paid a lot of money for it, and they don't want to know the kind of poor person that used to live there before it was renovated. My mother used to say, life may get you down, but you're only out if you want to be. Oh. My friend Arlo says that downtown is working so hard to be uptown that pretty soon there isn't going to be any place on the Lower East Side for poor working people to live. Yeah, Arlo stays over by Avenue C. He's a real nice boy. He looks out for me. Yeah, everybody likes Arlo. Oh, he's got a hole in his tongue. He's got it pierced. And he's going to get his whole body tattooed, he told me. Well, right now he's just down to the elbow because he doesn't have the money to go further just yet. Arlo told me that when he gets down to his right hand, he's going to put my name right there. And that way, he said, he'll think about me whenever he reaches out to people. I told him he should be thinking about a woman his own age. I mean, I could be his mother. But he just laughs and he says, no, you're my favorite woman. And anyway, Arlo likes other boys. Well, that's all right with me. My mother used to say there's room enough in this world for everybody and people should just live and let live. This morning, Arlo told me that he heard talk that they're going to build a big fancy office building between Avenue A and B that's next to the restaurant where I used to work. It's called a cafe now. Now they're calling all the new restaurants and even some of the old ones cafes. Like they think people from out of town won't know the difference and think they're in France instead of on East 4th Street on the Lower East Side in New York City. They put the cops back on the beat now, and they're going to be around here soon and make me leave. You know, the other day, I forgot to look for the cops and leave, and this young cop, he came and he kicked all my stuff right in the middle of the street, and I kept saying, I'm moving, I'll move, but he didn't care. He just had that mean spot. You know, my mother used to say some people had that mean spot. It's like an itch they got to scratch. But some of the nice people on the block, they went out in the street and they got my stuff and they let me keep it. So anyway, I'm going to leave now and I'll come back after the cops leave. And if you're still here and you see anything you might like, you can just make me an offer. Yeah. Thank you for listening. You look like real nice people. You look like renters. That's what you look like, not like owners. No, you look like renters. That's it. Thank you. Thank you. And Martha would love in the near future to have a chance to tell the rest of her stories. So I thank you. And next we have Robert is going to do something from his first collaboration with me, which is 1918, A House Divided. And that was set in Greenwich Village for the most part, and among the artists in Greenwich Village. And the primary characters were art students at an art collective, which they had in the village at the time, where artists would get together, pool their resources, and hire a live model. And Europe has already been at war in 1918, but the US has just entered the war when the play takes place. And one of the students got his draft notice. And his friend, who's been hiding his crush on this young man, tries to persuade him not to go in the song called The Last to Die.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah.
So one of the things that Barbara mentioned, like I said earlier, this is the first collaboration that I actually did with Barbara. It was 1918, A House Divided, and I don't have any background music with this, so it's going to be a cappella, and so I hope you enjoy it. And if you do want to hear not only this song but the rest of the songs from this musical, you can get on Spotify and search for 1918, A House Divided, and we actually have the original cast recording of this musical on there, so you can actually listen there if you want to as well. Okay, so here we go. They tell us it's ending, victory any day, but they want you to go there and into harm's way while I wait here and worry, back home safe and secure. There's a burning question that I'll have to endure. What if you're the last to die on the last day of the war? When the guns fall silent and the fighting's done, when they tell us it's over and the war is won, and the soldiers return from the foreign shore, I don't want to be waiting in vain at the door. I don't want you to be the one of the last to die on the last day of the war. What will it prove? What will it be for? If you're the last to die on the last day of the war. When the war is a memory left in the past, and the doughboys and generals come home at last, when the hawks are grounded and the white doves soar over fields of crosses on the distant shore. I don't want to know you were the last to die on the last day of the war. Thank you.
Thank you. Woo. All right. There we go. Yeah, I should also mention that I wrote the lyrics, but the music is also by Alison Tartaglia. Who's an incredible composer and performer in her own right and teacher. And what I liked about working and collaborating with Alison on the musicals that we wrote together is that she knows history also. So her music is contemporary, but it evokes the time period that it takes place. And I want to talk a little bit now about some of the research that's involved in writing historical plays, because again, I said that I don't write documentaries, and I often have fictional characters mixed in with the real life characters, but they're always based on they're a composite of the characters that I've researched. And I try with every historical play to have somebody knowledgeable to come and speak after performance. Andrew's done that several times, and I appreciate that. It's Andrew Berman from Village Preservation. One of my plays set in New York City, Baxter Street, is set in the old Five Points neighborhood before it was demolished to make way for the courthouses that are down there now in Lower Manhattan. And this woman came to speak who's an urban archaeologist. And one of the things she talked about is how at that time period, people would just throw their garbage out the back window. And part of what they could learn about the ethnicity of the tenants is by what the garbage was. And they would dig up the garbage, and if they found pig's bones, they knew that there weren't Jews living there. And if they found remains of small monkeys, it was usually Italians who lived there. And on a side note, one of the things I learned is that it was very expensive to buy a monkey for these organ grinders. So families would chip in and they would buy a monkey and they would take shifts as organ grinders. But these poor monkeys they got no break. They were basically worked to death, which was very sad. But that was how the organ grinders, and what they would do is, and I use this in another play, is they would come to like below the hotel windows of celebrities or rich people, and they would perform with their music with their organ, and until the people would have to pay them to leave. They would refuse to leave. So there's some things like that I like to include in my plays. And so I think at this point we can take some of your comments or questions if you would like. And while you were getting that up to speed, here's some more photos. There were thousands of photos I had to choose from. This is Robert in Unreachable Eden, and this is Robert with Matt Lauer in The Ghosts of 14th Street, which takes place on 14th Street during the early 20th century when they were making silent movies there. And this is me, not in New York City, performing in a short version of a play I co-authored about the French author George Sand. And this is up at a place called the Abbey of Regina Laudis, which is a convent, an abbey of cloistered nuns in, of all places, Bethlehem, Connecticut. And I would go up there every 4 years to perform up there at their Abbey Fair. So I performed a section, and okay, I was debating whether to show this one or not. This was from the first play I wrote, which was done at La Mama, produced by Ellen Stewart, and it was called Gravediggers, and that's me, and with Ray Hagan, who was my co-author, and we both were primarily actors, and we decided to, at a party one night, that we would write our own play and write parts for all of our friends. And we did that, and it was picked up by this director, and we didn't know how he got a copy of it, and he found a place to produce it, and then we had a falling out with him because the play is just a piece of fluff, but it's fun. There's a lot of good music in it, and we had a falling out, and there we were with a production and no place to do it. And since we both had worked as actors at La Mama, Ray asked Ellen Stewart if she could book our play, and she did, and we ran for 3 weeks there. So anyway, that's a little background on my process. And in the oral history that I did, you can find a lot about the process that I use if you have questions about that. And they just put in the chat my website address, and you can email me through that if you want to be on my email list to see about things coming up, or if you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them then. So I'm looking, are there any particular topics you like to write about? Absolutely. First of all, as a lesbian playwright, if I don't include lesbians in my plays, I get drummed out of the community. So I'm happy to do that anyway. And those include some real life characters as well as some fictional characters. I'm the daughter of a refugee from war, actually from Ukraine. My father was 4 years old when the war broke out there almost 100 years ago. And so that's been, with that legacy, I often write about immigrants, refugees, migrants, and my siblings who were all social workers. Somehow I escaped that. I don't know how. You know, we always make that distinction among those three names: migrant, immigrant, and refugee. They're very different. Their goals are very different for leaving home. And I think it's significant to make that distinction. And when they blur it, like they call all those refugees in recent years that, you know, on the boats that die, you know, when the boat sinks or whatever, they call them migrants. Most of them are risking their lives because there's less risk doing that than staying where they are. So that's a little bit about, you know, what I'd like to write about. And I do write comedies. It doesn't seem like it, but I do. Yes. And oh, Sarah Ploss has said yes. I also did an oral history with primary stages, and I was very honored to be asked to do that. And you can also find that on your website, and for their Off Broadway archives. And how do I get my ideas? Well, for writing plays about New York, there are some websites that I really encourage if you're interested in New York City history. There is Forgotten New York, which has a website. There's the Daytonian in New York, which also covers New York City history. There's New York Songlines, which gives virtual street by street walking tours, and they mention the historic significance of individual buildings that they feel have significant historic significance. Anyway, and I have found through that, I found many people that I wanted to write about that I didn't know about. And that's the other thing, is I try to write about people whose lives are either distorted or forgotten in history. Oh, okay. What I'm just reading what's on the side here.
So Barbara, we have a couple more questions. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm looking at that one. Do I sometimes cry as when I'm writing? Yes, I do. I can tell you a story. One of my first plays is called Pen Pals, and it's set in the future. And I meant it as a warning, not a premonition, when our government is taken over by the extreme religious right. And I often, like, well, pre-pandemic, when I was struggling with a scene or something, I would take a walk and I would go over it in my head, and I would usually solve the scene. And I would do these improvs in my head between the characters, because I had a lot of improv training as an actor. And one day I'm walking down the street and I'm trying to figure out this scene. It takes place in Canada. And one of the characters tells the other character that this third character is dead. And I was stunned. I was like, well, why is she dead? I didn't do that. And and I'm thinking, well, I'm the playwright. I decide who dies, and I like her. I don't want her to die. And these were all fictional characters. And but then I kept thinking, well, why did she say that about her? So I went back to that improv between the two of them, and she tells how this character died, and I realized I was crying on the street, and it was embarrassing. So I ran home and I wrote that scene, and that was one of the scenes in one of the climax scenes. Do I have a new play for 2020 Tour Theater for the New City? No, I have one for February 2023. But the Lower East Side Festival of the Arts, which is a wonderful gift to the city, is a Memorial Day weekend. It's 3 days of art of all kinds: music, dance, poetry, theater, visual arts, you know. And I usually write a short play for that. So I will, and I've done that every year. I will do that again this year. What makes me proud and worried about New York and US in general? Well, I always worry when the government shifts in this country, whether it's the federal government or now our city government, that's making decisions that horrify me in terms of protecting the legacy of New York City. Our governor by default, when Andrew Cuomo resigned, who I really liked, but I didn't know that much about her. And, you know, she seems genuine and real. But one of the things she's proposing is to do away with the zoning regulations for heights in all of New York City. And I find that horrifying, because it's just going to do away with landmark protections and so on. And what else? Yes, our new mayor. I'm concerned about his decimating the budget for landmark protection, as well as some of the other, what I consider very significant parts of our city government. So yeah, I worry about that. What am I proud of? Well, I'm proud of the resiliency of this city. You know, we've been through, in all the years I've been living here, we've been through some really, really tough periods of time where the city was nearly bankrupt and so on. And, you know, we made it through. And a lot of that, I think, is due to the artists. And we keep working no matter what, and we'll adapt to whatever the situation is, whether it's positive or negative, particularly during the pandemic. The theater community just jumped right in to take care of each other. There were grants that came up for artists whose plays had suddenly closed and they were left without an income. Organizations stepped up in the theater, whether it's the Actors Fund, the Dramatists Guild, some of the unions, to take care of each other. With Theater for the New City, Crystal Field was amazing. She immediately converted the work online, almost without a step in between. And so there was a lot of virtual production going on. And then she took the large gate that opened on the sidewalk on 10th Street into the workshop. And in that opening, they built a backdrop and they put theater lights and sound. And they marked on the sidewalk the 6 feet distancing and put signs requiring masks, and they had masks for people who didn't have one. And once a week for well over a year, there were performances every Saturday, live performances. You had to be vaccinated to do that. And, you know, it was live for the audience on the street. And it was a long time before I was able to get vaccinated and boosted. So I finally was able to perform there. And that was very exciting to see people looking back at me instead of myself in a little box, like I say right now. Let's see if there's any more. And I want to talk about the situation with landmarking and protection. And I urge all of you, if you have the money, to donate to village preservation. But if you don't, there's a lot that you can also do. You can write letters. And if you go on their website or you get on their email list, they make it really easy, like with a click, to send letters to the government officials, the city officials who are responsible for those protections. So I urge you to do that. So, Rebecca Fox is my cousin who I've never met, who asks, how long does it usually take you to write a play? Well, when I first started writing, it took me several years to write a full-length play. I would have readings after readings. I would rewrite and rewrite. And when I got involved with Theater for the New City, it took like just 2 or 3 years before I used up everything I had in the drawer. So I had to learn how to write faster without hopefully losing quality. And so it's usually less than a year. I'm already getting nervous about next February because I haven't landed on exactly what I'm going to write about. But, you know, it's at the icky stage. And once I decide, the writing part is easy. And for the last few years, except for the pandemic and the shutdown, I would go to Chelsea Piers, to the public access pier, and I would come with a yellow tablet and a pen, and I would write. And that's where I would write my plays. Then I would come home and I would type it up on the computer, print it out, and make changes and go back and forth that way. And I'm hoping that by the spring, it'll be safe for me to feel safe to go there. And I think that'll solve the decision-making I'm having trouble with now. So, what else? Let me see if there are any other.
I think that's it, but keep getting those questions in, everybody. And Janice also mentioned Purchase College students will be performing an excerpt from Birds on Fire. And Barbara, you'll be making an appearance for a talk back on Zoom on March 25th.
I have to mention that Janice, and I've known Janice since I think the year she was just out of college, decades ago. and we've worked together. She was in several of my plays. I directed some of her plays. And it's just, I'm so happy that we've been in touch and we've continued to, to maintain our friendship, and occasionally when we could, our working relationship, since she actually moved to Connecticut. So I'm thank you for being here. Let's see who else.
We have time for questions, so if you want to pop those in, I think we've exhausted the questions that we have so far. But I have a question for you, Barbara, about the monologue you did, the Co-Op Monologue. It really resonated with me. I live in Queens, and not to get too political, but shortly after the previous president was elected, we had a rash of police officers spilling carts over vendors I live in Jackson Heights, Elmhurst. So that really resonated with me. Could you talk a little bit about how you came to that monologue or writing that experience out?
Well, the story that I told today, which actually I just improvised today because I realized that I didn't take the full time that I thought the monologue would take. But one time outside on the street, outside or on the sidewalk outside of Theater for the New City, there was an elderly African-American woman who would put all of her belongings on this blanket to sell. And this young cop came around and he kicked everything into the street, into the traffic. And she was pleading with him to stop. I'm leaving. I'll go. And people came out of their shops to help, and they picked up her stuff, what they could rescue for her. And then after that, Crystal let her lock up her property in the theater at night to protect it. And I actually didn't see that, but I of course heard about it, and I was horrified. And that led me to take that walk on the Lower East Side. And when I would come across an elderly woman selling things, I would start to talk to them, and I would offer to buy something. But I never wrote down anything in front of them because I thought it would be very disrespectful. But I kept trying to remember what she said about that. And as soon as I could get out of her eyesight, I would make my notes and then keep walking. And that's how that play evolved. And but along with that, I thought, I looked into it. Once I set on what age I thought Martha should be, I thought about what else was going on in the city when she was growing up here, and how life was changing for her. So there are other stories she tells. She tells about her friend Lucy, who lived in 3F, which was third floor front. And Lucy started calling herself Dahlia when she became a flower child in the 60s. And the two of them went to Central Park to watch the first man on the moon. So she tells that story, and some other stories that I incorporated. So the whole piece is about 45 minutes long. So let's see, is there anything else?
Yes. What is your advice for women playwrights who are afraid to write about their past, which may be scary or devastating to relive?
Oh, well, I don't know their background. So, it depends on the person. As an actor, I ran into that in a 2-character play I was cast in. And the character that I was portraying encountered this other woman when she was the character I played was on her way to commit suicide. And it was not long after I lost somebody I was very, very close with to suicide. And I debated about doing it, and I was afraid to really go into those places. But then what I did was what I actually should have done when he died, was do the research on suicide. So I would stop all the what ifs. I had done this, what am I didn't do that, none of which had anything to do with me. But that's when I didn't know, that's that's how I responded. So I did a lot of research to do this character. And it was a way for me to work through that grief as well. And I learned a lot about suicide and what creates that need in people, and what are some signs. So in the play that I was cast in, the character doesn't commit suicide. The other woman, when she finds out, is older and kind of steps in, and we see a change in her from this egotistical actress to this very maternal woman who figures out how to help this younger woman who's so desperate and depressed. So it's a play called, terrible play title called Kingdom of the Rat, and it was written by a playwright named Charlie Curbs in New Orleans, who has since passed away. But it's a beautiful play. It's about a half hour long, and we did it around town a lot, almost like an audition piece for us. So
That's great. We have a few more questions coming in. Thank you for sharing that, Barbara. I think that's very poignant, that story, and helpful. Janice was asking, regarding your historical plays, can you describe your writing process and research process, like how many hours you spend at the library? How do you synthesize your ideas while you're walking?
Wow. I mean, it's different for each play. A lot, well, I wrote 3 plays about this woman, Eve Adams, who in the 1920s had a tea room on McDougal Street, a real life character. And, you know, most of the research was offline. If I Googled her, there was a little bit of information, and I later found out it was incorrect. And at that time, my friend Steve Siegel, who was the chief librarian at the 92nd Street Y for 30 years until they decided to do away with the library because the new administration needed more office space, which is another story. But I would run into Steve. You know, we belonged to the same group that had meetings once a month, and he would ask me what I was working on. I'd tell him, and he'd say, "What do you need?" And for Eve Adams, I was trying to find a copy of her deportation hearing because she was deported from the US. And I said, you know, they couldn't find it for me. The people were very nice at immigration, but they said it's too far back and they didn't know where it was. Well, by the time I got home, there was an email from Steve with a complete deportation file. And Steve was so helpful. He passed away before the second play, but he came to a reading of it when he was still very, very ill and fighting cancer. And I saw him coming in the lobby, and I said, "You look like you're in so much pain, you didn't have to come." And he said, "I'd be in pain at home, so I'd rather be in pain here and watch your play." So he was just a delight to, you know, he was so helpful. And when he died, I thought, well, wow, what am I going to do now? He's like my go-to person. But I realized I learned a lot from him on how to find things. And the New York Public Library has incredible stuff, but you have to send for it, and it's in person only. There are letters. I wrote a play about Charlotte Cushman, who was a mid-19th century actress in New York, and she toured Europe and the US. And there are letters that a young woman who met her in St. Louis, who ended up marrying Charlotte's nephew, between this woman and a friend of hers who was Edwin Booth's first wife. And those letters are at the New York Public Library. When I write plays about theater, with theater history, which I like to do, I go to the Players Club library. And there's a wonderful librarian who's a walking encyclopedia of New York City theater history, Ray Wemlinger, and he's very helpful. And what I love about researching there is I let him know what I need, and when I make the appointment and I get there and I hold the items in my hand. I don't have to look, through through the microfilm and stuff. So holding Rachel Felix, the actress's prompt books from 1858 in my hand, signed by her brother, who was her manager. It's very inspiring, more so than looking at something on the screen. So, those are some of the places that have the advantage of living in New York, that we don't have. But again, so much is online now. And I shared my research on Eve Adams with a biographer, a historian named Jonathan Lee Katz. And Jonathan Ned Katz, excuse me. He just wrote a biography of hers, and it was just published in the last couple of months. And it's a wonderful book. And I went to a book party that was the location where her tea room was, which is in a landmark building. And the owner of the building, who runs the Italian restaurant on the ground floor, let us use the basement, which was the setting for the Eve Adams tea room, to have this gathering. And some of her relatives, descendants of her uncle who lived in New York, or her great nephew in Israel. Anyway, they all came together, and some of them actually didn't know each other existed until the book came out, and either Jonathan or I were doing the research. So it was very exciting and to be included in that. And a journalist from the New York Times actually did interviews and wrote. They have a section now called, I can't remember exactly, but it's obituaries of people who should have had obituaries in the past. And one of them was Eve Adams, and she wrote an obituary of hers. So that's a long answer to your question.
It's a great answer. I learned a lot, and I put theplayersnyc.org. I think that's the website for the Players Club. So we'll include that in the email as well tomorrow.
Yeah,
and then
the library there is called the Hampton Booth Library at the Players Club.
That's great. And so just a note to everyone, I've collected all these resources, and we will send them out to you all along with Barbara's website and Theater for the New Cities of the New Cities website and everything in the email tomorrow. So we have one last question, Barbara. I hate for this to end because it's been just one of the best nights of my month so far, for sure. But Rebecca asks, how did you know you wanted to start writing plays? Kind of alluded to this a little bit before. And how did you come up with those first ideas?
Oh, well, I always imagined I was going to be an actor, and that was going to be it. And that's what I wanted. And I wanted to do that as long as I can remember. I never wanted to do anything else. And when I came to New York, I was in college, but while I was in college, I was doing plays off Broadway. One after another, I'd be in one, we'd rehearse after the performance for the next play, and so on. And this went on for about a year or two. And all of a sudden, I finished a production and I had nothing scheduled. And I panicked. And I thought, well, I've been in some really, really bad plays, and I've been in some really good ones. So I think if I write something, it's not going to be as bad as the worst one, and it may not be as good as the best ones, but they all got produced. So I'm going to write my own play with a part for myself, which I did, called Hell's Kitchen Has a Tub in It, which was semi-autobiographical. But by the time it actually got produced, I was too old to play my part, but I directed it. But that's how, and then I got through the draft of Ray and I wrote that musical Gravediggers together. And then I wrote a play. I was writing a draft and I realized that there was no part for me in it. And I thought, whoa, guess you're a playwright. So that's how I became a playwright. So it's, that's primarily what I do now. And because I was a director as well before I started writing plays, I direct the first production of every play, and then I send it off if I can to when somebody else wants to do it. Seema's Story, which I performed an excerpt of, was actually performed in Hollywood by a woman named Suanne Spoke. And so some of my plays have been to places I've never been. Because playwrights, even with royalties, don't make enough usually to travel unless the travel's paid for specifically. So, Leanne, can you save the chat for me?
Yes, I will definitely save the chat for you. I will definitely
Because
do that.
I'm on my brand new laptop, and that's one of the things I haven't figured out how to do yet.
Yes, I will definitely save the chat. And also, I'm just going to share one thing with everyone before we close, but please don't go because I want to bring Robert back. But we have our next event is March 23rd. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Village Preservation Village Awards that are open for nominations. We mentioned Theater of the New City won one. And so it is prestigious. It's a great way to recognize the organizations, the places, the buildings that you want to honor, and it gives it a little bit of a boost in the media. So if there's that place that you want to save for everybody else, please feel free. And I'd love to bring Robert back for a moment and just say, hey, everyone, we don't have applause, but put your thanks in the chat and just fill that up with some wonderful applause equivalents of thanks in the chat, because I know.
Let me say
yeah, we won't close. Go ahead. Yeah.
I want to say something about Robert. After rehearsals, we would walk together up to 14th Street. And this is when he was only performing in my work or choreographing or something like that. And I would vent to him, which I thought was totally unprofessional to do that. As the director of my own work, it's really unethical. And finally, I thought to myself, well, why don't I just make it official and then I don't have to feel guilty? Since I consult him anyway, and that's how we became co-directors. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we've ever disagreed with each other, really, because we have the same philosophy of theater, but we have different strong points. Obviously, I'm so non-musical, having written musicals, and I've been into, but anyway, so that's what's been a joy and a relief. And on the few times I haven't had him, he's contributed in whatever way he could. Like in the last production, when he wasn't able to be in it, he choreographed Lola Montez's dance, and there's a picture of that as well. So anyway, thank you for sharing this with me, Robert.
Barbara, thank you for inviting me to do this, and I'm happy to share this with you. And I hear these stories all the time, and so I'm actually very happy you're able to share a lot of these stories with everyone else, and everyone can hear all about your process and about you in general. So this is great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So with that, keep sharing the love in the chat. I'm going to mute myself and go off camera, but I'm also going to capture this chat for Robert and Barbara, unless there's anything else either of you would like to share. The floor is yours.
Well, just thank you to everybody for coming in and listening to us and watching us.
Yes, thank you all very much for joining us today, and I want to thank the Village Preservation Society for actually hosting this event as well, and inviting Barbara to be a part of it, and inviting Barbara to do this, and allowing me to actually join with Barbara as well. So thank you very much, especially you, Leanne. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. I am thrilled, and I am very inspired, and that's a great way to end the night, especially with everything the world is going through. To share the theater is great. Barbara, did you raise your hand? Did you want to say something else?
No, I did that. I'm on my new laptop, so I don't know how that happened.
No problem. Well, I raised my hands to both of you, and thanks. And so we'll end the evening, and thank you, and take care, and we'll share all those links with you all tomorrow. So thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Get back, stay safe, be masked.